Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I guess from my end, because I'm in China. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome to this webinar. Welcome to the Center for Global Development. My name is Jude Moore. I'm a Senior Policy Fellow here at CGD, and welcome on behalf of our co-hosts, the AfCFTA and UNDP, to this webinar on a common market in Africa. And today the question is going to be about how the common market can strengthen tech and innovation ecosystems and strengthen the RECs. But before we get into this, I want to welcome you to this discussion. It's one that's necessary, one that is relevant, especially for what is happening in the world today. The U.S. Commerce Secretary gave a speech in which she was threatening NVIDIA and other U.S. Chip manufacturers that if they design chips around the sanctions, simply so that they can sell them to China, she is going to put sanctions on the new chips immediately. Now, I'm raising that point not because of the tension in geopolitics and geoeconomics, but the attraction of the Chinese market. So attractive is the Chinese market that U.S. firms will design products around U.S. sanctions so that they may continue to have access to the Chinese market. And in the African market, there is a possibility of creating a market that has the same attraction, the same pull, the same lure. How we get there, though, is the conversation that we're having here today. And so on behalf of, again, my co-host, I invite you to listen to the presentations, to come with questions, come with suggestions, because we believe that it is out of these conversations and out of webinars like this one that we're going to create the Africa we want. Again, on behalf of all of the co-hosts and co-sponsors, welcome, and let's have a productive conversation.
Thank you very much, Jude. Distinguished participants, distinguished colleagues, I would like to join Jude in welcoming all of you to this second webinar in a series of 4. So we have 2 more to go. And as Jude said, we're looking into the question of how to establish the common African market and building on what is on the ground. And what's on the ground is that we have got the African Continental Free Trade Area, which already has programs on free movement of goods, free movement of services, free movement of people, and the free movement of capital or investment. So it would look like a low-hanging fruit to leverage and forge ahead towards actually having a one African market that we keep on talking about, which, as Jude said, would give us the numbers that we need to attract critical levels of investment, create jobs, create employment, and have the structural transformation we always talk about through catalyzing industrialization and investment in infrastructure and other public goods. So having said that, I would now like to introduce the presenters for today. Now, within that overall question of how to have the common African market, today we would like to zero in on an innovation ecosystem. Because in order to have industrialization, in order to have new products and industries on the market, we need a supportive, facilitative innovation ecosystem. So Dr. Marcelo Ouma is going to take us through that. At the same time, we live in the 4th industrial revolution, where digitalization is a critical success factor. Without it, you really can't do much as an economy, as an enterprise. So Martin Mbaya is going to help us look at that. But even if you had all those things in place, if you don't have the supply chains correct, if you don't have the trade facilitation programs in place, right, then things will not move around easily or in a way which gives competitiveness to economies and to enterprises, right? And we also need rules of origin, which can facilitate the industrialization that we talk about so much. So Mark Pearson is going to help us look at that. So those are the three questions that we have and the three presenters that we have. So beginning with Marisol Ouma, she's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and currently serving as a Deputy General Counsel at the Kenya Commercial Bank. Then Martin Mbaya is a doctoral fellow at the Strathmore University, which is based in Nairobi. He's also a PhD candidate, and he is a founder and a co-founder and owner of Nairobi Capital, which is an MIT incubated startup. And then Mark Pearson is an economist and a specialist, an expert on trade facilitation, infrastructure. In fact, his name is synonymous with some key corridors around the continent. He is a go-to person if you would like to know about corridors and how supply chain works on the continent. Now, having introduced them, colleagues, it's now my pleasure to call upon Maricela to make her intervention. Over to you, Maricela.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon and good evening. And I think, as they say in Haiti, for in China, good night. As Francis said, Maricela of the Kenya Commercial Bank, we are part of the regulators, gives me an opportunity to discuss a couple of things that have been in various fora as well as papers. And talking about innovation is something that is very close to my heart. And I think one of the things, just for starters, that I'd like to say is that the continent, the African continent, has natural resources, which we should be able to put into consideration to be able to deal with issues of innovation. I think for most of the part right now, what is happening is that we seem to be net consumers of various goods and services as opposed to be producers. And as Dr. Mangeni pointed out, one of the things that we're looking at under the AfCFTA is the issue of free movement of goods and services. And these are in vacuum. And I think it's important for us to look at the innovation ecosystem. The things that we normally look at is the governance, the regulatory framework, the issues of finance and access to finance, market, supportive networks, including the collaborative partnerships. And I think how they deal with the system within the context of the common market, also under the AfCFTA. So one of the things that you're looking at is that the level of innovation in...
Excuse me, Maricela, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
The continent is relatively low, and
it looks like Maricela was having some bandwidth issues, so we'll give her a moment. For the time being, I think we should give Martin the stage, and maybe Maricela can come back in a moment.
Right. Okay. That is all right. Let us see whether she can fix it. But in the meantime, let us then transition to Martin.
She's back though. She's back.
Okay.
She's back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. I have backup systems and they both failed. So I was just about to join, to connect with my phone. I'm really sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, so sorry about that. So I've put my phone on backup just in case it pulls another one on me. So sorry about that. So I was talking about the different issues on the innovation systems and what it is that we need to do. And I was talking about that when you look at the Global Innovation Index, you find that of all the countries in Africa, Mauritius is the highest in the continent, at coming in at number 45. And you find that most of the things that they look at is in issues in terms of intellectual property receipts, market sophistication, high-tech exports, intangible asset intensity, total value of the global brands, and all these speak to issues of intellectual property. And you find that these are areas like, for instance, if you're to look at the big brands that come from Africa. So in terms of innovation, looking at the Global Innovation Index, we are very low. I think out of the top 100, there are just about like 6 countries. So that's basically Mauritius, South Africa, I think Botswana. You find that those are the countries. And one of the interesting things, that the thread that runs across most of these countries that are part of the top performers, you find that most of them have very strong intellectual property laws and intellectual property systems. So I think this is an area that we need to look at, because innovation does not operate in a vacuum. It basically needs the IPR rights and the intellectual property rights to be able to boost it. So you find that in terms of the innovation system, when you're talking about all these issues, it's important to build the necessary infrastructure and capacity, have the technical competency, as well as promote entrepreneurship, which will spur innovation and provide an enabling environment. One of the other things that you find is within the African Union, we have the science and technology agenda strategy, which basically sets out the things that we need to do. And this, I think, is buttressed by the recently adopted AfCFTA protocol on intellectual property. One of the problems we've been having in Africa is lack of harmonization. So you find that we have all terms of protection. So you find that even movement of goods from one place to another might be hindered in terms of the different IPR rights, given the fact that you find that intellectual property rights are territorial. So it's important for us to be able to look into, and I think the AfCFTA protocol provides an opportunity to create a harmonized system. And I think once we are done with the annexes, which are going to dig deeper, because I think that the protocol just gives the general framework, but once we look deeper into the annexes, which will now give the specific forms and regulations that we are supposed to deal with, I think that should be something that should be able to provide or facilitate the intra-African trade. The other thing that I wanted to look into is innovation is basically a tool for development. And I think this is something that we need to capitalize within the common market. And of course, I know my colleagues are going to talk about the new technologies and everything. We cannot move away from the fact that we have all this new technology that is coming in, and there are issues of intellectual property that come in. So if you're talking about big data, this is something that can be used to inform what needs to be done. Because as I said, innovation does not exist in a vacuum. And for a very long time, for most of the countries within the continent, we are always working on what we call discovery innovation. Innovation. And so we should not just be consumers, we should be both producers and consumers in terms of innovation. So I think in a nutshell, I think intellectual property, whether you're looking at issues of branding, whether you're looking at issues of technology transfer, whether you're looking at issues of manufacturing, it plays an important role. And for us to be able to facilitate that within the ecosystem in the context of the IPRs as well, we need to ensure that we have the facilitators, and these are basically the accelerators, which will include the hubs that we have, the universities and research institutions that should be able to incubate and help grow, actually provide opportunities for innovation. And as I said, it's cross-cutting and it plays an important role. And the other things that I was looking at in terms of the disruptive technologies is issues of artificial intelligence, social media, and also if you look at issues of blockchain, you find that right now we have what we call the non-fungible tokens. So innovation can actually exist in all these particular areas. So we don't need to wait for the major, terms of the final product, as opposed to looking at it in terms of a process or a process and a product both combined. So for me, I think this is something that is very crucial, and we need to look at it in all spheres, whether we are talking about agriculture, manufacturing, so that we are able to enable free movement of goods and services, movement of ideas within the continent. Thank you. I think I shall leave that for the question. I can see my internet is a bit unstable, so I shall leave that for now. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Maricela. As you're talking, I was just thinking, yes, so to deal with the unemployment on the continent, especially among the youth, and in the rural areas, if we really had an ecosystem that enables people, especially young people, to turn their dreams, their ideas, their skills, even their problems, into actually viable commercial enterprises, to commercialize them, and then grow them, scale them up into national brands, regional brands, continental brands, and global brands. That would be the best way to deal with unemployment, and at the same time, to grow our economies, to industrialize. This would be fantastic, wouldn't it? So thank you so much, Maricela, for your intervention on the importance of an innovation ecosystem in what we are trying to do, namely trying to make sure the common African market takes off and that it is truly transformational. So now we turn to Martin Mbaya, who is going to tell us about digitalization in these modern times that we live in. And I think Maricela has laid a very good foundation for you on which to build. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Francis. I believe I'm audible, and my connection is good.
Very much so. Good.
Fantastic.
Yes.
All right, excellent. So in my roughly 7 minutes, I'm going to take us through a set of 10 slides, and I'll discuss the digital economy. The questions that were posed to me were, what should or rather first, how is the digital economy being prioritized in the African Continental Free Trade Area? And secondly, what should a digital economy look like in a common African market? I'm speaking to you from Pretoria, South Africa. I've been here roughly from October the 25th. And in that period, I've traveled over multiple countries across Africa. And I want to use that as the backdrop for the conversation and the presentation I'll have with you. So let me put up some slides, and then we'll kick off. Hopefully those are visible. Francis, you can confirm also?
Yes, we are seeing them. We can see them. Do you want to put it slide? Yeah, that's right. Yes.
That's good.
Better, much better.
Great. So my presentation builds on a book chapter that I've worked on with a set of co-actors, Brian Omwenga, based at the University of Nairobi, Dr. Winston Ojenge and Professor Tom Ogada, who are the African Center of Technology Studies. I serve on our governing council. And Matthew Njuguna, who's my former student in our BCom program at Strathmore, and I believe several of them may be in this session. There are a set of phrases that have been used in the initial presentation: innovation ecosystem, as well as innovation system. I was glad to hear the Global Innovation Index being mentioned. That simply refers to the set of actors, the linkages, networks that bring them together, and the rules that govern them. And I also want to introduce a few more concepts. Holistic innovation policy regimes. These are combinations of policies at the national, regional, continental, global framework that speak to each other and operate in support of a national innovation system. I want to introduce the concept of business and human rights, the Ruggie principles. These have been around for many, many years. And essentially, it's burden of care. Do large companies have a responsibility to look after those in their value chain, those they work with, the employees, the consumers of their products? The Sustainable Development Goals from 2015, there are 17 of them, 169 targets, 247 indicators. And there's a lot of people who've written and spoken on this. This is an excellent backdrop for thinking of the protocol on digital trade that was being alluded to. And if you want to learn more about it, just check our book chapter or go to the AfCFTA website, AU, and it'll tell you a little bit about that policy instrument. I believe it's not yet been completely finalized, but there are promises for 2023, maybe early 2024. I think of it as an innovation ecosystem, what was being alluded to before, an environment where actors and their linkages can excel. And I also think of it as an innovative governance system where the interests of these actors, the institutions they represent, and how together they implement come together. And I want you to look at the images on the right. We were very fortunate just this year, I believe earlier this month, to host His Excellency Wamkele Mene, who oversees the Continental Free Trade Area. The host was our president in Kenya, William, His Excellency Samoei Ruto, and you see also the Ambassador Meg Whitman were there. That is our auditorium at Strathmore. The conversation was around digital economy, artificial intelligence, emerging technologies. That was happening against a backdrop of King Charles visiting Kenya, but most notably in the US, you had all these fights in a company called OpenAI. And on the bottom left, you see the former board and the CEO. On the right, you see the new board. And this is just to signal that the digital economy is massive, it's critical, but it's on everybody's minds. And my parting shot for the presentation will be, who is thinking about Africa? So if you look at the board at the bottom, both the previous and the current, is Africa reflected there? Gude is joining us from China, and there are actors who may be in the US. Those are the two nodes that are prioritizing artificial intelligence. Is Africa just a follower, or is Africa also helping drive how this emerging technology will play out? And I want to argue, based on this photo at the top, where I see several of my colleagues who I can name individually, that Africa actually has presence, and I'm very convinced CFTA will drive things. I want to give three contexts to bring this to life. I'll pick three sectors. In my own education area, we have digital learning. In issues of trade, we have in Kenya challenges around the digital service tax. And then I'll also bring out that concept of AI I've discussed. So let me start with digital service tax. Over the last 3 years, there's been this tussle between the Kenyan government on one hand and the Kenya government on the other hand. So think the Ministry of ICT and the Ministry of Finance about how the ICT sector should be regulated. Should you tax it to get revenues, or should you not tax it so that you can promote a healthy ecosystem? And this shows you the roller coaster that has had to be gone to be pursued. Earlier on, I was involved back in 2019 through our private sector alliance, KEPSA, in trying to help navigate and form a position for the private sector to inform these conversations. But I just want to signal there are systemic barriers to the digital economy in an area like trade. Around digital learning, back in 2020, everything shut down in March. I was in Pretoria at that time, exactly where I am now, made it through the skin of my teeth, through Kigali back in Nairobi, before everything shut down. Only universities that had been thinking about the digital economy, digital learning prospered, and that's a little bit of what I'm doing in my own PhD. In this slide, I see my faculty colleagues. You see a professor there, Dr. Branya, one of some of my former students, stellar students, This was what played out in 2020 in Kenya. The previous presenter talked about the Global Innovation Index. I also want to talk about the Webometrics Index, which says which universities are ready. The third one around AI, I just want to present the policy process model. We start by defining a problem. We come up with policy options. We implement based on a selected policy option. Then we monitor and evaluate. And for AI, the issues I was bringing earlier around open AI, is America and China thinking about Africa? Are we helpless, or should we forge ahead as Africa and formulate our positions? I want to argue that if we navigate the policy process model through instruments like the protocol on digital trade, we will do well. And let's now focus on implementing. Specifically in the context of AI for that second step, which is policy option formulation, Kenya has been doing some amazing things around responsible AI through the Global Partnership for Sustainable Data, I've forgotten the other D, working with GIZ, the German government. There've been a set of conversations of figuring out how do you make sure any AI, the technology, as you think of the stack, is interacting with users will be safe. In my own organization, where I serve on the governing council with my co-authors, ACTS, we have been running a program on behalf of CEDA, the Swedish, and IDRC, the Canadians, that's been bringing together 18 African countries, 22 universities, mostly the techies who work on the stack, to think about responsible AI. These are photos from Mombasa last year in December. We'll be meeting again in Addis for the wrap-up of the program. A lot of pent-up energy. Where does it go? What can funders do? How do we work together? How do we channel this towards the CFTA? To bring all these ideas and make a specific conclusion and recommendation, I'm of a strong opinion that Africa policy-focused think tanks, like my own ARTS and many others, I serve on another board, APHRC, and have interacted with many others. Why don't we prioritize technology forecasting, technology prospecting for an emerging technology like AI? Think of it at the national, regional, continental, global level, channel it through the CFTA, and help our presidents, help all these leaders appreciate that there are unique things Africa can do. Secondly, can this protocol on digital trade be piloted in a practical way? In my travels across Africa, within the last month, 2 months, I've been to Dakar, Senegal, here in Pretoria. I'll be going to Addis and Kenya. Last year I was in Cameroon. As I mentioned earlier, I was in Kigali. All these different countries, the first thing I think about when I land is, do I have internet connectivity? Can I pay? Do I need a visa? I think if we solve this for all Africans, forget about everything else digital, just these three, we will do amazing work. And I see content creators do that. So why don't we pilot some ideas? Let's add Nigeria, let's add Burundi, South Sudan, which struggle a little bit, Nigeria, which is large, Egypt, which is large, plus all these countries I've traveled to. I landed briefly in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. I was using Kenya Airways, so they were refueling, so technically I was in those countries. We can learn from content creators and move to other areas. In closing, I want to give you practical examples. I know my brothers might be here. We went to a famous high school in Kenya called Alliance. Earlier this year, we were singing, our school will turn 100 years old in 2026. 3 years in advance, we started practicing music, and we're building a big new construction where we hope will perform at the centenary celebrations. And I have minimal music training, but I managed to compose a simple song about this building we are putting up. This was us presenting. AI does amazing things. My own research is looking at digital learning. There are issues around bias we think about, I've discussed this earlier, and issues about business and human rights. So this is just to signal researchers are thinking about this. Let's all think about it together. My own arts, we are establishing in Konza, and I'm hoping, even as we close the project in Addis, my executive director, Professor Ogada, when we move to Konza, we can carry Africa with us, do amazing things. And in my closing slide, why am I passionate about all these things? Because my supervisor for my master's was the late Calestas Juma. We launched his book earlier this year. We celebrated him last year. He continues to inspire me and my own PhD supervisor, Professor John Mugabe, took up from Professor Juma at Arts. So this is not theory. For me, this is real life, this is practice. And this is my parting shot. The digital economy is alive. The future we desire, Dr. Mangeni, I think he's already here. The protocol on digital trade and the African Continental Free Trade Area already give us the instruments we need. Let's just focus on implementing. Investors, ecosystem actors, let's just do this. Thank you, and back to you, Dr. Mangeni.
Yes, I like that closing. Let us just do it. Let us just do this. We have everything is in place. Yeah, we have got the protocol on digital trade, which is going to be adopted at the next summit of the African Union in February or thereabouts next year, 2024. And we've taken all these good ideas into account in the negotiation of this protocol. But what's really interesting is that you would like, us to adopt a practical approach, a hands-on approach, yes, and get this done with some pilot countries, real countries, and institutions. Colleagues, Martin has been referring to ACTS, where he sits on the governing council. ACT stands for the African Center for Technology Studies. It does a lot of wonderful work, and I would highly recommend it and ask you to have a look at their website. You'll see what they are doing. So thank you very much, Martin, for your passionate intervention. Right, now we go to Mark Pearson, who, as I said, I hope you agree, Mark, that your name is synonymous with key corridors around the continent. If you don't agree, I know you are just a very modest person, that's why, and a very polite person. But you really have done very impressive work around the continent, across the continent, and you have got a wealth of knowledge in this area. So I would like to give you the floor so that you can make your presentation. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you for the introduction, Francis. Well, there's lots of experts, and if we can all just work together, then maybe we can move things on. As Martin says, maybe we should just do it. I think that was Nike's byline or buzzword. I'm going to also share my screen. I've just got a few slides that I would like to share with you. I'll try and be as hopefully you can see that. You can see the screen.
Yes, we can see that. We can see. Please proceed. Yes, yes.
So just in a summary, what I'm just going to talk about is that most of the member states of the AU have adopted policies to achieve economic growth through industrialization and exports. I think most of our countries are looking to promote industrial growth. I think at the very beginning, Jide was talking about China as a market. I mean, China, you got 1.3 billion people in that market with no borders. I think for Africa, if we're going to export, we need to export. Sorry, if we're going to industrialize, we need to export, and to export, we need to have good trade facilitation issues in place. Industrialization is dependent on efficient supply chains. I think that's an obvious point. In globalization, we are getting goods from all over the world or inputs from all over the world, and then doing assembly and then exporting all over the world. And Africa is no different than the rest of the world on that. Within the AfCFTA, I think we've set up a good platform for the trade and the Africa that we want. In particular, we have rules of origin, which I think built on the rules of origin from the REX, and in particular, the accumulation provisions. The AfCFTA accumulation provisions view all some small little small little issues that we need to take account of in the rules on accumulation, but in general, I think that they look good. But if we're going to trade, then we need to have very efficient supply chains. And if we have efficient supply chains, we need to be able to cross borders efficiently. If we're going to cross borders efficiently, we need to have trade facilitation instruments in place. And not only have trade facilitation instruments in place, but we need to make sure that those trade facilitation instruments are actually working. So the AfCFTA provides us with the trade facilitation instruments. They pretty much follow the trade facilitation agreement of the WTO, and they don't contradict it. And I think that most people are in agreement that these are the minimum requirements in terms of how we can implement trade facilitation. And to do trade facilitation, we need digitization. And I like what Martin was said. We should focus on 10 objectives, one of them being movement of goods and services across borders. And that's really what I'm going to talk about. We've adopted policies to achieve economic growth, and I'm going to use the example of a vehicle manufacturing plant, which is based in South Africa. Now you'll see that picture is obviously not a manufacturing plant in South Africa, and it's obviously not a modern manufacturing plant. There's too many people there. There are not enough machines. That's actually a Porsche assembly plant in Stuttgart many years ago, but never mind. I just wanted to give you the example. So for the OEM, there are tier 1 suppliers. Those tier 1 suppliers will be supplying things like headlights or infotainment systems, wiring harnesses, and car seats, etc. You then have tier 2 suppliers. For headlights, those tier 2 suppliers could be LED bulbs, headlight housings, headlight lenses, etc. Infotainment systems, video screens, and computer chips and speakers, wiring harnesses, insulated copper, computer chips, connectors, and then car seats, leather and steel tubing and foam rubber. And then you can also have tier 3 suppliers, and you can go on. But from our perspective, we need to look at what we can produce within Africa so that we can have regional value chains as opposed to global value chains. And I think the AfCFTA allows us to look at how we can mobilize regional value chains. And if we use accumulation, we can also benefit from the regional value chains within the framework of accumulation. There I've given some examples. So for headlight housings, could be a regional value chain. The lenses could be a value chain. Insulated copper wire could be a regional value chain. Obviously, connectors and leather and steel tubing and foam rubber could also be regional value chains, meaning that in this case, the vehicle assembly plant in South Africa, you could get a number of tier 2 suppliers as regional suppliers and link up with regional value chains. And within the framework of the rules of origin, everything that comes through the regional value chain would originate from South Africa in this case. So in terms of accumulation, if we look at the vehicle OEM in South Africa, you're basically saying that you can get supplies from all over Africa, and you could put that into the vehicle OEM. This is in theory, at least, because the AfCFTA allows for that to take place within the framework of the accumulation provisions or the rules of origin. So that's if you look at Article 8 of the rules of origin, you will see that the accumulation is allowed, and accumulation is, to my mind, quite liberal, because you're treating every member of the AfCFTA as being in the same territory. Now, I assume that the same territory means the same customs territory. In terms of how accumulation can help, the issue really is that there is accumulation. Well, the accumulation within the AfCFTA is built upon the the REC accumulation, and I'm more familiar with the COMESA and SADC accumulation provisions for free trade agreements. But if you look at how often accumulation is used, well, I don't know of any instances in the COMESA and SADC free trade agreements where accumulation has been taken advantage of. And that might be because there's insufficient knowledge in the manufacturing sector on how to benefit from the accumulation provisions. Accumulation is quite a esoteric and difficult subject at the best of times, and it's unlikely that the private sector would spend a long time plowing through the rules of origin and the workings and processings. So it may well be that they don't have this sufficient knowledge to benefit from the accumulation provisions. It could be that there's insufficient knowledge. So, I mean, if you are a manufacturer in South Africa, do you know what's being manufactured in Nigeria that you could benefit from? Do you know what's being manufactured in Kenya? We don't have the Alibaba for Africa. We don't have the market platforms that we would need to be able to share that information. And then the other factor really is that it's still a fact that it's often much easier to import from overseas than it is to import from another African country, and often much cheaper because of our transport arrangements and our supply chains. And that is something which the AfCFTA also needs to take on head on. It's not going to be resolved unless we take positive action to change that. In terms of the other side of the coin that we need to look at to get the AfCFTA to operate, really we need to not only sign up to the trade facilitation provisions that are in the AfCFTA, but we also need to make sure that we implement them. And there I've just given some examples. All of these are customs issues within the framework of the AfCFTA, within the trade facilitation provisions of the AfCFTA. But if we were able to actually implement those, if all the AfCFTA members were actually implementing these trade facilitation agreements, not just signing up to them, but actually implementing them, then I think there would be a major change in both the cost of trade. And if the cost of trade goes down, then there's also obviously a lot more production which will take place in Africa. This just gives you an example of how well some countries, this is, as Francis says, I do a lot of work on the corridors, and this is basically the implementation of trade facilitation within the countries that are serviced by the North-South corridor, so from Congo to South Africa. So what this figure is telling us is how well countries are meeting their commitment targets. So how well are they actually meeting their targets in terms of implementing the trade facilitation agreements that they said they were going to implement. It doesn't tell you how well they're implementing the trade facilitation agreements, but it does tell you how well they are doing in terms of meeting the commitments that they've made. This is in the framework of the WTO, but I'm sure that the AfCFTA will have a same kind of metric that will be put up not in the not too distant future. But you can see that we're lagging behind. South Africa, no, I mean, so DRC and Mozambique have implemented 100% of what they said they're going to implement. How well they've implemented that is another question. If you look at a country like Zambia, they've implemented 1/3 of what they said they're going to do. Eswatini is even less. So not only do we need to look at how well we implement it, we also need to make sure that we follow what we do what we say we're going to do. There's always a saying that when all is said and done, there's a lot more said than done, and I think this is the case in trade facilitation as well. So if you just take an example of a trade going along a corridor. So here we have a consignment which arrives at a port. It's loaded onto a truck. It crosses into the border from country A to country B, transits through country B, gets to the border between countries B and country C, and then clears the consignment into country C. So that doesn't sound too difficult, but when it actually happens, this trader may be a low-risk trader. He may be a member, he may be an authorized economic operator, he may have a low-risk cargo. So you'd expect that cargo to be treated with a lot of, well, to be treated as a low-risk cargo, and so it should go through borders quite quickly. The problem is that when he gets to the border, no one knows he's getting to the border until he actually arrives at the border. And when he arrives at the border, it's then his clearing agent will take the documentation to the customs, and customs will then look at it and say, yes, this is low risk. He's an authorized economic operator, but the guy's in the queue and he has no way of getting out of that queue. So even though we have implemented these trade facilitation agreements on paper, we don't implement them in practice. And the problem really is that if you're moving, you need the data to go first and then the vehicle to get to the border, then the data and then the vehicle. And you need to do that on a continuous basis until you get to your destination. Conversely, you could actually digitize the whole of this, the trade facilitation onto a data backbone. And these are something which I think would be a good exercise for the AfCFTA, if I'm not trying to give you extra work. But if we had a data backbone which was able to work along corridors, or we could pilot them along corridors, then I think a lot of the challenges that we face at the moment in terms of getting goods to the market or getting goods to and from countries, especially inland countries, would be solved. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. And I hope that distinguished colleagues can see that he has quite a wealth of information on trade facilitation, supply chains, corridors, and all related issues, tying in with the digitalization as well. So I think that has rounded it up very well for us. The three presentations, beginning with the Marcella on an innovation ecosystem, which is a critical success factor for the AfCFTA. And then, of course, digitalization in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. Maybe we are talking about the fifth industrial revolution, bearing in mind that actually 30% of the world's critical minerals are on the continent, are in Africa. So we've got something we can say forcefully, actually, about these critical minerals, and in fact, about the fourth industrial revolution. And if we can position ourselves to make the most of it. And then, of course, Mark has taken us through the practical things on the ground, how to get this actually working. So now, I would like to turn the floor back to Gide, who is going to get us into the question and answer session. Over to you, Gide.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you to our presenters. And obviously, the way our conversation is structured was for the presenters to sort of just whet our appetites, provide a context so that you would be able to. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, please raise your hand so that we can start with you first, and then we try to discuss some questions here if so please, anyone with questions, anyone with comments based on the topics being discussed today or the presentations that you heard, please come forward. All right, we will begin with Melody. Melody?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the speakers for such insightful thoughts. I think my question, I have two questions, I guess, one for Ms. Maricela Uma, and then the other one more of a question or a comment to Mr. Martin. So for Ms. Maricela, I couldn't follow all the discussions because of the connection issue. But from what you were sharing on the importance of intellectual property rights, I think that's quite very important, especially now where we are dealing a lot with big data and AI. But my question to you is, how do you think we should go about, especially when it comes to issues around patents and copyrights, and how do we go about assigning such specific intellectual property rights? I know you mentioned branding. It's a bit easier to brand and to trademark goods and services, but when it comes to issues around patents and copyrights, where we now have a generative AI, for example, that is producing work, and you want to take ownership and have intellectual property rights within those works, how do you go about it? And just to give an example, I think 2 or 3 years ago, South Africa actually granted a patent to an AI system. So already some countries are recognizing AI as inventors and assigning intellectual property rights to AI, but other countries are not in that position. And now we are talking about the African continental free trade area in the digital single market. How do you see us navigating those issues and assigning of intellectual property rights? And then the second question, I'm not sure if I should say it's a question or it's a comment for Mr. Martin. When you were sharing your presentation, and I think that's for your chapter contribution, and you said just from this picture, I think Africa is doing a lot in the AI space. As you can see, there's all these people that you could name. But I was looking at it that maybe look at it from a geopolitical position, like who actually are the actors who are actually assisting African governments to develop AI strategies, to develop data strategies. And I think that can also shape how you are approaching your contribution, because I'm at a point where, my opinion, I'm leaning towards we are not doing much as Africa, but we are getting a lot of support from different actors. Of course, they come with different interests as well. So that is more of a comment. I don't know if you want to respond to that, but that was just a suggestion I had for that. And then to Mark, it's more of just saying, I really like the contribution and suggestions you are making when it comes to the, what do you call them? The corridors and the importance of data sharing. But don't you think the problem is more of the administrative stuff and not necessarily the data sharing part of it? And the reason why I'm saying that is because I'm from Zimbabwe, and I was living in South Africa for quite a while. And then one of the days I went to Zimbabwe, and the border system had been digitalized, and everything was quite efficient. But the problem was people kept on going back to the traditional ways of doing things. So I'm thinking your proposal to say, okay, we need to share data, and data about your cargo, for example, it's already shared with the next border, But the problem, in my opinion, would be if we can go to all the border systems and the borders and actually train people on how to become digitally skilled and how to work in a digital setup, because I foresee the same challenges where there are delays because people are used to their traditional ways of doing things. So those were my comments or contributions. Sorry for taking too much time. Thank you.
All right, we should, if there's another comment or question, and then we can let the presenters sort of respond. Any other question or comment? Yeah, is there a question in the box, or is it just comments?
A mix of both, but I think Mark has responded a bit to the comments already.
Okay.
I will give. Yeah.
Go ahead, Kia. What were you gonna say?
I will give it over to Maricela, Martin, and Mark to respond to Melody's questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Melody. Sorry. Sorry, I need to put down one of my devices. As I told you, I have my backup just in case this one goes off. So on the issue of intellectual property, when you're looking at the issues of the disruptive technologies, more so when you're looking at generative works by AI, those have posed a very, very serious challenge in terms of issues of ownership, in terms of creativity, issues of authorship, in terms of patents, the issues of who the inventor is at that particular point in time. So as you rightly put it, right now, each country seems to be approaching it in a different way. So you find that most countries have taken the approach persons. So you find that the AI, if it's generated by AI, it will either be granted to the team that created the work, or the company, or the person who created that particular work. So the jury is still out for quite a number of places of countries. And one of the things they look into is AI being used as a tool, or is AI the actual, like, is it the one that is actually doing the work? So for instance, if you take an example of ChatGPT, it's basically a large language model. So the question is, it goes through a learning process like anybody else. So the question is that, what do you call it, a tool that you're going to use for you to be able to produce work? Or is it actually having an independent mind for it to be able to create that particular work? So those are some of the issues that I think right now, as I say, the opportunity we have right now with the what are they called, the annexes to the AfCFTA, is to look into those details and see whether we can be able to get a common ground. Because if South Africa is already doing that, and you find that Kenya will definitely say no, or Nigeria will definitely say no, it will create a problem in terms of the ownership. And as I said, it's territorial, but you have to have some harmonized system. So if I want to be able to deal with that particular patented product in another jurisdiction that does not recognize the ownership or the authorship of the AI, it will become problematic. So I think that's an to see how we can be able to address these particular issues. But I think it's mainly in relation to authorship and ownership. Can an AI actually be deemed to be an author, or an inventor for purposes of the patent? And then in terms of just looking at the whole IP ecosystem, yes, as you said, branding and everything is very easy. And I'll just give a very quick example of, let's say, we can even use generative AI, and we say that this particular AI has created a product that is used for purposes of lighting in the rural areas. Like basically less than 50% of the continent is, has electricity. So someone comes up with a software, a product. Maybe let's assume it's using some non-fossil base, let's say biogas or something like that, and they're able to come up with a lighting system for a village. So you find that when it comes to that particular product, you find that now there's a village in Kenya where it's being used, and then you find it's going to Zimbabwe, and everybody tells you, if you want to light your rural area, let's say Anga. We're going to use Anga. That's the trademark that you're dealing with. But then if you're looking at the entire system, you'll find that the product that you have now, the final product that, when you're looking at the whole plant, you have the receptors, you have the biodigesters, you have all those things that you're dealing with that has been created. You have the patent that has been created for the various products that you're looking at. You have the software that's protecting, the copyright that's being protected by software. So for instance, if I'm going to be having the changeover switch that I want to use between the grid and the non-grid, the changeover switch would definitely be patented. And then you'd find other areas where you have what you call the petty patents or utility models. So you find that probably that particular receptor might not necessarily attract a patent, but it needs to be protected. So you have it protected as a utility model. So you find, like, I'll give you a very, we had a Vaxi, it's called the Vaxi box, which was displayed last week during the Kenya Innovation Week. And you find that because they were not able to get, it's basically a refrigerator for vaccines that you can actually use in areas which are outside the grid. So you find that because they could not get a patent at that particular point in time, they actually opted for the utility model. So you find that it actually does spur innovation. So there are various ways we can plug in the IP, and that's why I was saying that innovation does not operate in a vacuum. So I hope I've kind of answered your question. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I can go next. Melody, that was a very welcome question. Hopefully you can see the slide I've shared on the screen. Assuming you can see the slide, I think that the comment you made was this perspective: which actors are helping support data strategies? What are their interests? And in AI, I guess it was to ask it directly: who's really in control? Is it Africa, or is it actors working through Africa? I wanted to give two reflections. When we talk of artificial intelligence, let's think of it as a technology, just as we will think of the phone, as we will think of a car. And let's think of the hardware associated with that technology or the software. And let's call that the stack. So it's the databases that host all this data, the supercomputers sitting either in continental US or continental or within country, continental Asia, country China, where there's all this code that's running and making all these different correlations. And then there's the experts, the individuals who sit in these two respective countries, maintaining these systems and the rules that are made with respect to those systems. I would argue, and literature shows, that the two nodes where this is happening at scale is the US and China. In this particular slide, that's the domain of artificial intelligence developers. And one could argue Africa may not have a competitive advantage in this area. It will require enormous investments. That said, because of the kind of challenges we saw happening during COVID, where we had to resort to local value chains instead of global value chains, a lot of what Pearson was discussing, it's important to have those capabilities nested at a national or regional level, and these national regional levels, I think, trying to coordinate in a way that engages with the priorities of the continent. On the other extreme, you have, in the context of AI users, these models that are built, these are code that is combined, has to be trained. And a lot of the data used to train these models has been sourced globally. And to a large degree, Africa has not been able to contribute the sheer scale of data that sits in many locations, purely because things have not been digitized and processes have not been digitalized. I think this is where Africa leads. And if there is a deliberate effort, particularly with intellectual property rights regimes as part of a holistic policy framework, innovation policy framework, if there is a deliberate effort by governments to think of data as a resource, just the way oil is a resource or minerals are a resource, build on the AfCFTA protocol on digital trade and focus heavily on the data side, the user side, in ways that complement the stack, the technology stack, the developer side. I'm of a sense that Africa is already ahead. Probably even, these are personal arguments, I think Africa is ahead of other actors globally. On the technology stack, I fully agree with you. You're either dealing with American technology, Chinese technology. There are nodes within Europe that are probably also ahead in the space. Having made that distinction, the arguments I made in my closing about technology prospecting and technology forecasting, I think think tanks that can span this continuum of the tech, hardware, software side and the softer social sciences, human side, and give very well thought through use cases that can inform decision-making in the context of trade CFTA, but more broadly in the AU, anytime there's a gathering of presidents. Can we think of an Africa in 2050 or even sooner, maybe 2035, that is actually a global leader because of comparative and competitive advantage around data and users in the context of AI, and Africa that I think puts the stake in the ground and makes arguments and standards revolve around that. But anyway, I'm very aspirational. I'm trained as an engineer, and I have this social sciences side. So I tend to believe in what can be done as opposed to being slowed down by what cannot. But at the end of the day, I make sure the literature also supports it as an academic. So Melody, I hope I answered. It's more about the data, the users, less about the developers, the technology stack, the software, the hardware. Over to Mark, or back to you if that wasn't clarified or good.
Mark,
Thank you,
over to you.
Thank you, Melody. Thanks. The question you asked me was whether the issue was not more of a problem of an administrative issue rather than a data sharing issue. I think that it is certainly true that we do not spend enough time in change management when we introduce these new systems. If you're a customs officer and you're sitting at Chirundu, you being from Zimbabwe, you'll know how hot Chirundu is. If you're a customs officer and sit at Chirundu and you're asked to go to another office to start dealing with issues, and that office is not as comfortable as your office, is on the other side of the border, then it's less likely that you would want to go there. And as far as you're concerned, as a customs officer, what you're doing works. It's not in your interest to go faster. It's not in your interest to do things more efficiently. You just need to get your days through and deal with the pile of paperwork that's in front of you. And that's what you've been trained to do. And so you do find that in all of the borders that I've been involved in, there is, let me call it what it is, sabotage of the new systems. But that is something which is a fault because of the lack of change management. When we did the one-stop border post in Chirundu, we did the one-stop border post in in Kazungula, the amount of time that we spent on change management was minimal. So as soon as you leave, everyone goes back to what they were doing. But that does not mean to say that we should not implement the systems, and it just means that we need to spend more time, as you suggest, on change management and administrative issues. But we still do need to put, to my mind, we still need to put the backbones and the digitized systems in place. And we need to move on. We need to stop talking about one-stop border posts and do no-stop border posts, where 90% of the clearance procedures are done behind the borders, not at the borders. And unfortunately, I think that we are moving in the wrong direction. I mean, if you go back to Chirundu, Zimbabwe is now concessioned that border. They spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars on that border. That means that they need to get their money back. The private investors need to get their money back, which means that they will force people to use the border, which means they have to stop people. So it works in one way, but it doesn't work in another way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We have one more question in the chat. The question is, wonderful presentations. When developing a digital ecosystem, the issue of how to deal with competition can't be overlooked. For instance, there are big players, these so-called gatekeepers from our American and Asian counterparts that are way ahead. How can African innovative startups compete?
Well, we'll give Marcella an opportunity to respond here on the issue of competition in the face of facing giants.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's an issue that always comes up in terms of how do you compete? And I think it's normally people look at it as an issue of the David versus Goliath. But one of the things that I'd first of all want to look at is when you're looking at the innovation ecosystem, some of the things that we need to make sure that we have is access to finance and we need to have the accelerators and including the incubators. And these actually do help because they bring the startups were telling us last week is the issue of financing. So they come up with these great products, but they do not know how to put them out into markets. So they need to have access to finance and provide an environment where they can thrive. So we've had a couple of startups that are coming up, and you find that they're now moving into $1 million and stuff like that. And it's just first and foremost in terms of capitalizing on the intellectual property that they have. So for instance, if they're to get into an agreement with a finance institution or a funding institution and all, one of the things they leverage is the intellectual property that they have. So getting the exposure and the finances, I think, is one way that we can actually help them fend off the competition. And then number two is also looking at, when you're looking at the startups, it's the issues that they're trying to address. When you're talking about an innovation that you've come up with, you need to figure out what problem you're seeking to address. So you find that most of the solutions that they have are basically based for quite a number. They seem to be country specific, but as time goes by, they're able to use them or expand and use them elsewhere. So the other thing that I had said is that innovation does not operate in a vacuum. So I think that's one of the things that the startups need to know. So I think about the AfCFTA and what do you call it, the strategy, the AU strategy for innovation. These are some of the things that we need to look into and ensure that they capitalize on their intellectual property and we create the necessary environment for them to be able to compete with the global brands. Thank you.
Could I comment to that question also?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I've got two perspectives I'd like to take. One as an entrepreneur. In the introduction, it was mentioned I was a co-founder of a company, Nairobi Capital. It's actually almost 12, 13 years old now. We co-founded it with an MIT classmate and his sister. And at that point, we were trying to disrupt mobile money in the context of lending. M-Pesa had just come alive in the Kenyan context, but the banks had not caught on to the opportunity for making short-term working capital loans. And I remember as we were being incubated out of something called Mass Challenge, we were, I think, one of only 2 African startups. And in that context, we had to talk about our ideas, try and get investors for whom Africa was a fairly foreign concept within the Boston innovation ecosystem and was seen as a very risky place, particularly trying to move into a space of combining technology and money. The company since pivoted. It's now more in the real estate space and hospitality space within one of the towns in Kenya called Nakuru. And the company has done well. Of the companies that were being incubated within Mass Challenge, we are among the few that survived and has still done well. I'm also an angel investor in a company called Zeraki, and this was started by a Harvard colleague, and it has digitized the secondary school edtech space, or it plays in the edtech space. It has digitalized a lot of schools, public in multiple African countries. It already has funding from a variety of actors, both domestic and global. They are angel investors. They are more advanced private equity level investors. I think Acumen is one of the bigger investors. And this is an idea that I saw the founder take from scratch and grow gradually and has ultimately excelled. What I can share from both of those two perspectives is that the funding value chain is extremely difficult to navigate in an African context. And so the question being raised is valid about competitors. When you think of artificial intelligence and the digital economy, there may be a fear if I come up with an idea, Microsoft will snap it up, maybe Google will snap it up, OpenAI will snap it up. And in our own Kenyan context, maybe a Safaricom will snap it up, even my colleague here from a major bank, KCB. So among the smaller entrepreneurs, there's that fear. But I will give a counter argument. As an entrepreneur, as long as your idea has been extremely well thought through, and you always retain a competitive advantage at an individual level and within your small company context, it doesn't matter what kind of competition comes in, there are ways you will always be able to outcompete. But in the same vein, I also throw a challenge to governments. Could there be creative ways at an African level that the AU, for example, designates the 10 countries I was talking about and uses a policy instrument like procurement as a way of churning multiple innovations through these smaller startups at a scale and with the kind of protections that can allow those governments to secure the interests of these innovators and entrepreneurs against the interest of much larger companies at a global level. And here I'm thinking out of the box. Could AU invest in the Microsofts and the Googles and the Facebooks, Metas, etc.? And at the same time, could the AU insist that significant investments should be made in it that ultimately benefit some of these actors, so that when these companies are gobbled up, some of that IP remains both within the African ecosystem, but it can be taken advantage of globally. So those are a set of challenges I would throw. The second dimension, because I talked about think tanks, just very briefly, good, is there's a lot of innovation also happening in the context of think tanks. In our own acts in Konza, there's some interesting ideas playing out. We can meet offline and have deeper engagements on this. Back to
you. Thank you, Martin. Is Francis on? I don't see him.
I think he. I think
well,
he may
no,
have.
He's there.
Not,
he's there.
What do you mean you are not seeing me? Have I become invisible?
I see you now.
Did you try to reach me and I wasn't available?
Yeah, we are coming to the end of our time, and I wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to ask, ask a question. I wanted to give you an opportunity to do so.
No, it is all right. I think we have had such a wonderful discussion. It's a pity that we didn't have enough time for everybody to ask questions. I saw that there are people who had to leave, regrettably. Yes. But I think we have had a very good discussion. I would like to extend my appreciation to our three presenters, Maricela, Martin, and Mark, and then to yourself, Jude, for the moderation. And then, of course, for being our gracious host at this event. And we can only look forward to the third webinar, which will happen not in the not too distant future. So thanks very much, everybody. Thanks to all the participants who have been able to participate in this webinar. Back to you, Jude.
So again, thank you, Francis, and thanks to everyone who stayed on for the length of the webinar. We will send you an email with sort of a summary of the discussion that was held here today, and there will be another webinar in this series as we try to wrap up this. It's an important conversation to have. This is the moment to have it, and thank you very much for spending some of your time with us today. Thank you.